Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 579th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Mason. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're talking about Modern today. It's my favorite format. We're hanging out, and you know what? What more could I ask?
I could ask that Spencer is able to make it today, but life gets in the way. We soldier on.
Yeah,
We talk about Modern.
yeah, it happens. Life gets in the way. Life in the way. I don't want to put that on him. I don't want to put extra stress. What I do want to put on the listeners is the Modern update. So it's been about 2 weeks since we had our last episode on Modern. A lot has happened in that time post RC, and we're going to kind of cover some of the big changes and things that have happened since that last update. Back in the old days of Magic podcasting, this would have been a very normal episode. We had GPs every other week. We had SCGs on the weekends that weren't GPs. There was constant churn, kind of like this, and it's exciting to see it again.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, this is something I talked about when we made the move to the two two RCs per season. Of like that second RC is going to be like a real reaction to the first data point. There's going to be some amount of spin and innovation there, and I mean we're really seeing that. I think in Modern. Yeah, right now I don't know if you want to dive in with kind of the biggest headline of what to look out for, but
yeah, I mean, Jeskai Flicker has taken over and Goryo's is dead. Kind of going into the last one, people kind of thought Goryo's was good, hard to play, players might adapt right, but Goryo's has just kind of fallen off a cliff when it comes to representation. Obviously, it's still around, but Jeskai Flicker has become like the mid-rangey, grindy gamer deck of choice, and hallmarked by Misplaced Ginger streaming it 24/7 on Twitch. That's how you know a mid-range deck is mid-ranging. Ginger just doesn't stop playing it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that Goryo's is dead. I think Goryo's is just continuing to be Goryo's, but there is a definite, movement in the metagame, which kind of makes sense when you think about where Modern's been, but away from the idea that Thoughtseize and Frog are the best ways to combat things in mid-range sense, and that should be kind of your plan for a more fair game than some of your Solitude and Riddler stuff. But rather that playing Flage and Ragavan is much more of what you want to be doing with your other game plans than kind of having the Goryo's plan and the Flicker plan and all that. It's just let's just stick to two core game plans and really execute them well, and they're playing all the good cards. Something that, like you said, Misplaced Ginger is known to do, and really feels in line with the strongest parts of Boros, right? Like Filio is a card on the outskirts of that deck for a long time. Ragavan is a staple, but kind of having the Solitude, Ephemerate, Consign, and Riddler Consign stuff, taking the place of the more exploitable and more one note kind of things that Boros does at the exchange of the aggression. You can't be nearly as fast as Boros, but you're also less susceptible to a lot of things that kind of hose it.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, Quantum Riddler too has sort of been, this card has been creeping up and up and up in Modern, and I think like it is such a good complement to the Ephemerate package of Solitude, right? Like Solitude Ephemerate was such a strong combo, but it was often like, well, what is that second thing that goes with it, right? And that was kind of lost in a lot of these decks. It used to be like a Fury back in the day for like the 4-color decks, but you didn't really have something else that you wanted to Ephemerate. And now having Quantum Riddler has just, really made it like, okay, great. I can kind of, dump a lot of cards, refuel on cards, and just churn, but also get these free wins that are so important in Modern against these really powerful decks. So I just put, a 4/6 into play on turn 3, and, it's a pretty huge body, and it lets me use all these pitch spells and still have more, right? So I can kind of fight through the first and the second wave. So that has, I think, been a big part of it as well. I think kind of the other big thing that has happened is like the Consign entering these main decks in a big way has been pretty huge in my mind, of helping keep Tron down, helping keep, decks like Belcher down, and then also sort of, doubling as those extra ephemerates that are, in some ways, even most of the decks more than the ephemerate, right? Because it still sort of lets you cheat these things into play while being an incredibly powerful answer tool that you just lines up in game ones a lot.
Yeah, I think that Consign playing double duty, not only as a defensive tool against a very, you know, important niche of the metagame. There's so many things that you can catch with it, but also being that that fail point
Mm-hmm.
of, oh well, I don't have a thing to do with this Consign. Well, let me use it as a scam piece,
Mm-hmm.
in a way of keeping my Riddler in play or keeping my Solitude in play. Or even just protecting myself from your Solitude, or negating your Riddler, like draw on a turn. Like there's a lot of ways that it cleanly exchanges with what's going on in the format, and works proactively too. So it's definitely become a really strong role player, and I think poses a pretty big threat to a lot of decks that are trying to use the things that it's kind of naturally intended to be fighting through. I think it's a bit harder for a deck like Tron to feel excited, knowing that the number one most played deck in the room is playing 4 Consigns in the main deck.
Yeah. And we talked last time about how Tron was sort of a really strong deck that had a couple really big issues. One of them being Amulet Titan, which is still very much around, still very much a force in the metagame, and we should talk about that next here. But, combine that with these Jeskai decks going up, and it's like, oh, mid-range deck, I should be salivating. Wait, you're main decking Consigns? Wait. Don't do it. So I think Tron is a really powerful deck, but has had a lot of other metagame forces pushing it down. So I think it's less like Tron, post Pro Tour hasn't, and post RC hasn't really been a bad deck. It has just been sort of positionally a lot worse with what people are playing. Um, Titan, though, I mean, last time on the podcast, you kind of really sang, its merits. We talked about really liking the Titan deck, and it has continued to really do well. But there have been, some predators kind of rising up in the metagame. But still, the deck on the numbers is just absurdly strong. And I think it would be a disservice for us not to mention here near the top of the show.
Yeah, I think that Titan is still, it's still an incredible deck. It's still fantastic. I think that, there are so many angles to attack from in Modern, and Amulet poses a very interesting, kind of thing to combat, because it has so few things that are easy to interact with. Like, it operates in spaces there's not a lot of ways to go. But, a big thing that I think influenced Amulet being as good as it was, and being as hyped as it was, is that people were not playing a lot of sideboard cards to beat the Amulet deck, and were not playing a lot of like the important cards that they know make their Amulet matchup better. Mm-hmm. That started to happen more, and also strategically we've seen newer decks and takes on things that are designed with Amulet in mind, as like I want to have a good Amulet matchup. Let me make sure I have the density of interaction I need at the speed that I need to make their life difficult with a fast clock. Let me put together a game plan that makes Amulet a bit scared, and get that matchup to maybe not perfect. I think there's not many decks which are like super excited to play against Amulet all the time. It's still a bit scary because of the speed of Titan, and for that reason, I think the Titan is still a great choice. But it's feeling the heat. Everyone's eyes are on it, so there's a certain amount of come for the king going on there.
Yeah, definitely. I think Titan is not at the current stage of Modern, and kind of unless the card pool changes dramatically, it is just still so powerful and so proactive and resilient to a lot of things that need specific stuff, that unless everyone really bands together, and we all agree to fight the Titan Menace, it's going to be at least a reasonable choice, and most likely a better choice than that, especially if you're someone who has played this deck a lot. We saw Jack Potter, better known as House of Mana, win the team event in Modern at the Energy, And Abe, his teammate was Vinny, the winner of the American RC on Jeskai Blink. So their team was like, do we want the RC winner on Blink or a Titan player? And they went with the Titan player, right? I think that's telling, right? Obviously, there's other things going on. Someone has to play standard, but I do think that it's sort of like, if I had told most people this is the team, where do you think the modern RC champ from 2 weeks ago, who's worked on the deck a bunch and helped, push it forward and played it the next day in the solo event, where do you think he lands? And the answer was, not modern. I do want to talk a bit about this deck though, that you kind of hinted at. It's like people are trying to play decks that have good Titan matchups in mind. And I think Birthing Ritual is also the deck that has like sort of the most question marks with a lot of players. We saw it, convert at the RC for a couple invites. We saw this past weekend, it double finaled the NRG 10K. It made the finals of the Apex Invitational. And I think it missed out on top 8 of the Laughing Dragon event, but was in the top 16. And this deck is something that I also hear different people talk about differently. So, for example, I was doing coverage of both the NRG events, and I sort of pegged this deck as like, if you're trying to resolve 1 or 2 cards, this deck is really good, especially against the combo ones, right? Like Subtlety, Flare, Force Negation, these are all cards in the main deck to varying numbers. Even Endurance is in the main deck. So all of those cards line up well in Titan to various degrees. Obviously, Force Negation is the worst, also the one they had the least of. They even had Harbinger this season in their main deck. But when I heard Ross Merriam talk about it, who's someone who I think is very good at identifying what matchups are about and have a lot of respect for his opinion, he was saying how this deck is like built to beat the mid-range decks, right? And I'm starting to wonder, like, is he right? Am I right? Are we both right? This deck has a pretty big question mark on it. And seemingly, it's in the early stages. Players are still figuring out how to play with it. I definitely saw some people stumble through some lines over the course of the weekend. I also saw a lot of tight play. But this is a deck that I think, like, where is it? And, like, how close are we even to the final evolution? As there are, like, a lot of cards in it and a lot of problems it still needs to solve. And players seemingly are going lots of different directions with lots of different builds. So what do you think about it all? What do you think about the Birthing Ritual deck?
I think the Birthing Ritual deck is really interesting. I think that, at some level, it's easy to look at the deck and say, well, it's a pile of below rate Elvish Visionaries compared to like what I could be doing in the format. I'm cascading into Birthing Ritual, and then it's got some counter spells, but it's hard to visualize like how do I win if my opponent just cares about killing my Abhorrent Oculus, which is a fair criticism. But the best parts of, the Simic, or not Simic, the like Frog Oculus deck were the threats, getting those things in play. And in some regards, I think that Birthing Ritual is a card that is very unexplored, or at least underexplored in Modern. And the way that this deck uses it as an engine piece, not only to kind of cheat in an Oculus or cheat in a Harbinger and give you more opportunities to see it, but also like creating this like card advantage engine of every turn giving the opportunity to turn a Coiling Oracle into another Coiling Oracle, or just turning one cantripping thing into another, when combined with Flare of Denial, Force of Negation, Subtlety, Endurance, right? All these pitch spells. It almost has like a Rhino's style game plan to it, if that makes sense. Of like, I'm going to be able to... I'm going to play at a bit of a disadvantage because I have the Cascade stuff. My deck is not going to make very impactful to the board plays in the early turns. But then, once I get going, I'm going to be presenting a Quick Clock and back it up with some really solid interaction and have, a mid to late game plan. In this case being, maybe your hard cast and the Subtlety, or some lists are playing Brazen Borrower, you're kind of chip shotting the rest of the way there, or using Oculus. I think that the deck in that way is operating in a good lane. We talked about 2 weeks ago the different Esper Blink decks, but specifically the kind of like pitch spell one that had top 8 at the Pro Tour, the kind of Overlords and the Hydrostatic Elementals, all that. that seems like a similar concept when you really boil down to what are the things it's excelling at doing. It's playing,
Mm-hmm.
it's playing strong threats and it's backing them up with, efficient interaction in the form of these pitch or sacrifice spells, right? Flares and forces and pitch elementals to keep its advantage going long enough to close the game. Except I think that this deck is, in a way that people have not really reckoned with yet, stronger at keeping the cards flowing than the other engines before it, because Birthing Ritual is so strong at what it does and is trying to do in this deck. And because so many of the cards already replace themselves, you get so much more opportunity to find the right piece of interaction. And, an Oculus will kill you very quickly when combined with, just about anything. I think it's just a very interesting deck for that reason, but definitely has, is playing in a lane that seems opened by the realization that pitch spells are really good.
Mm-hmm. That makes a ton of sense to me, especially the part about like this is sort of Esper mid range, but like leaning into maybe being a bit better at replacing and moving through the deck, or replacing cards, excuse me, moving through the deck, and a little worse at having like raw rate monsters, right? Like we're not going to compare Coiling Oracle to Psychic Frog, but they are cards that compete against each other, and in some spots, Coiling Oracle is better, right? Like being a thing that can sack to flare or find more counter spells, like immediately or get to your mana quicker is like important. I also think a big thing that a lot of people find are pretty constantly surprised by is Birthing Rituals being +1 or less than the mana value of the creature you're sacrificing, meaning that it can like chain off like Oracle into Oracle, right? Like I kept seeing Twitch chat comments that are like, you can't do that, because I think they're thinking of it like Birthing Ritual, or excuse me, Birthing Pod, which I believe always had to go up +1. I actually never played with that card, so I'm not 100%. Yeah,
but you had to get something that was one more.
Yeah, and that was something that I actually found was pretty good about the deck that like goes a little underappreciated. Was just like, oh, I'm like just Oracle into an Oracle. Obviously, I wish I had an Oculus, but whatever. I sort of just moved through a couple cards this turn, got a couple pieces, sort of like what you're saying, and you're going to kind of brick a little bit, and I'm just closer to these cards that actually matter. And I think that's like pretty powerful. And I also think that like Oculus is weirdly very good at just like swinging games in a way that's like kind of obvious when you read it, but you kind of think, yeah, it's modern, like you're gonna have enough answers for this. But when you stick it in this deck, it's so hard to get it off the table, right? Like I play it and you try to Solitude, and I have Subtleties, and I have Force Negations, and I have Flares if there's any other creature on the board, right? So a very powerful deck that I think really just needs to solve the issue of when there's a resolve thing on the board, how do I get through that? And there's a lot of Dismembers in decks right now. The winner, Nathaniel of the NRG, was playing a couple Brazen Borrowers as a way to kind of be a strong 3-drop creature, also an answer, that's like cheap. That way you can not nombo with your Shardless agents. And I think that's all pretty interesting. I've seen Quantum Riddlers in the deck. That seems very appealing to me. There's a lot of card draw in this deck, so you can actually like trigger your Riddler multiple times in that way. But also you can turn Riddlers into Riddlers, Riddlers into eyeballs. It just seems like a deck that is in its early stages and already doing quite well, with a lot of room to move and adapt. Right now I think being blue-green makes a lot of sense. It also could make sense in the future for this to be a 3-color deck, right? It could make sense for this deck to move away from Shardless Agent. I think there's just a lot of room to explore this, engine of cards, this shell,
Yeah, and I think that it's like kind of important to remember. I mean, if you're someone who has been paying attention to Modern for the last couple of years, a big thing that we've seen in the decks that we're talking about, even just at the top of the show here, but in these newer decks and the surgence of like Quantum Riddler is, I mean, think about when we had the One Ring, when we had Up the Beanstalk. These are extreme examples, but when cards are really, really accessible, like cards in hand and replacing cards in hand, when that is very attainable, the pitch stuff becomes so much stronger. When that's not the case, or it comes at a real cost comparative to how else you're able to source cards in hand, it's less viable, right? Like you kind of want to play fewer things like Solitudes if you're relying on something like Stock Up, because you're not going to go up a large raw quantity of cards, and you want to find the right things. Maybe playing a bit more narrow of an answer is better than having relying on this. But when you have Quantum Riddler, which represents a lot of cards, when you have decks trying to create those kinds of circumstances with like in Jeskai with Riddler, or in this deck with Birthing Ritual and all of the cantripping creatures, like there's a lot of card advantage goes along, or even like the first dose of card advantage goes a long way when it's kind of still at a premium and you have it and your opponent doesn't, and you can then not worry about mana in your exchanges. You get ahead on board, and then you can cast a Flare of Denial or a Sink into Stupor, and then pitch. They counter back or they interact with you. Pitch a Subtlety, or cast a Flare, or cast a Force Negation. Like, you have a lot more ability to win those fights because you just have more resources, and that's more of what I think the games are becoming about in this current kind of push of the metagame to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk a bit about Affinity, because Affinity has done fine, hasn't done incredibly well. And when we last left Abe, I was incredibly high on Affinity, right? I was saying, like, I might regret this, but I'm kind of really, excited about this deck. You mentioned how it at least makes sense if it makes sense. Before I kind of talk about where I'm at with Affinity, because I've played it a lot recently, where are you kind of at with this? We've seen it, by the numbers, it's still doing good. It just hasn't won anything.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple, like the same factors that have pushed some other decks out, and kind of the adaptation of sideboards in Modern to cover what's going on, I think has hurt. Is it a bit too, like the Affinity deck? I know I've had more Vexing Baubles played against me. I've seen more of them showing up in deck lists. I think that I've seen more people like making sure they're playing Wrath of the Skies decks. Like the Jeskai deck is kind of built in a way that has it in mind. And then there's kind of also the inherent variance of playing a deck that is very opening hand centered, like Affinity. And there's not a consensus on the best way to build it and the right balance of things. Like, some people are playing, 4 rebukes. Some people are playing, more zeros in some quantities, or more lands, or there's just these things that haven't really been worked out. I think the deck, I'm not as high on it as I was a couple weeks ago. I think it's still very good. And is definitely still a deck that I would feel comfortable registering and feel good about registering for an RC. But, I think that I've felt more of its consistency issues. It also felt like people are doing more in other ways that have hurt its position in the metagame as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned last time how I really like CFT's build. Right, that was like the differential I wanted to make clear. That was like, I think if you move towards Imri Tamio, it helps that last part that you mentioned, which is like, you need to have these specific cards in your opening hand, because I think it's true you need specific cards, but this kind of widens the range, right? You lose some of that burst by not having Ornithopters and Mimnites, but you gain kind of more cards to play your game plan around. I found that deck to be quite good. I still think it is a very good deck and totally reasonable. And if we were playing a team event, Abe, and you told me, like, you're dead set on this, I would not be losing sleep over it, right? I think there are better decks to be playing. And I think one of the big things that I was kind of coming to was, I want to get these, like, fast threats on the board and kind of take over the game with interaction. That's what I was really looking for, and the Birthing Ritual deck has done that for me, right? It has sort of, it isn't as good at, like, closing the game out quickly, but it's much better at interacting. And when it does sort of two-card you, like, get an eyeball into play very quickly, or something in that vein, it does win the game really quickly in a way that's similar to Affinity without being so weak to cards like Wrath of the Skies, which are definitely beatable but require a lot of finesse and a lot of, like, good decision making and getting a little lucky in the right spots. So, like, all right, I got to tap out, hope you don't have this, it's the right time to do it, and, hoping that pays off. So I think Affinity is good. I still think it's, like, a very powerful deck, and I think there's, a lot of legitimacy. There's more legitimacy to the other builds, I think, as I've played than I kind of initially thought. And I think that's another archetype that's still rounding itself out and figuring out exactly where it wants to be.
Yeah, I think just kind of what you said there about Simic Ritual occupying a similar space of like, let me just present a threat that is
Hmm.
hard for them to work with. Like, I never thought about it before, but Abhorrent Oculus is kind of like Kappa Cannoneer at home.
Yeah, it is
like
Captain Candy at home. Yeah, and your deck's
like you
better at
untap with
protecting it.
it, they're
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah, exactly. And you like find it very easily in this deck too. And I just think you're also better at protecting it. One of the things that I did was like I was on the full four Singing the Stupor, full four Metallic Rebuke, and like kind of wishing I had another thing to like play that sort of Delvery tempo-y game. And so maybe it's also just like I was looking for that, and that was one of the best ways to do it. Um, and I was also really looking for a deck that like had these like, oops, I win. There's not much you could have ever done draws, and Birthing Ritual has enough of those while also just being good against I think a lot of the pretty good decks. Um, the deck that I've always been kind of low on, but has done well, it won an RC, is Ruby Storm. This is the one, in our little notes, we were joking, like making it headlines like Ruby Storm, more real than you thought, and it is a deck that has always had this insane confidence interval. Like when you look at all the Frank Carson or all the other data, it's just like every time it's like this deck, we're not really sure. Because it does present such extreme high and lows, and I do think player skill matters a good bit, and what's going on in the metagame matters a lot. Of note, the Ruby Storm win was 2 weeks ago, and the Birthing Ritual has really cropped up in the last week, and I didn't see a ton more of Ruby Storm since then. But this is a deck that like is strong, is popular, but is very like inconsistent in its ability to kind of output wins at like the consistent rate, right? Like like turn 4, turn 5, you're gonna win, but to like really get there in turn 2 or 3, especially through hate, I have found to just not be like a reasonable, consistent thing. I think if it was, this would be one of the best decks, and I think it does have a pretty good Titan matchup, and that's why we see Titan players kind of, excuse me, Ruby Storm players succeeding in part because they do have such a good Titan matchup.
Yeah, I it's hard for me to believe in Ruby Storm. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason for that is I think that there's just so many things that hose Ruby Storm specifically for being a Storm deck that people just play. Like Aurum Chants have shown up and may continue to show up in like control sideboards. Um, there was a bit of a vulnerability to fast combo in the format as things got a bit more mid-rangey, but
Mm-hmm.
any time that they can kind of pinpoint what the fast combo decks they need to worry about are, they're able to just play the right cards for it. So I don't know. I'm not going to say that Ruby Storm's back, if it ever was here,
Mm-hmm.
but it did have a very impressive showing at that RC a couple weeks ago, and I think that it speaks to just a broader, there is a way to attack the format that is not getting into these mid-range fights. It is to kind of play with some speed and resiliency. And Ruby Storm does that. There are lots of games that it wins where it looks very impressive. It is a pretty scary deck, the speed especially. Um, but unless you're really a Storm person, it's not something I would go with. It's something I would make sure to know that like, hey, there's a chance I could play against Ruby Storm. Do I have the cards in my sideboard that allow me to have tools to fight through this deck? But I wouldn't necessarily be excited to sleeve it up.
Makes sense to me. And I kind of agree with that as well. Maybe I'm just a hater, but I would say this the one thing maybe, and I don't think you mentioned this, and pardon me if you did, but if you want to do something like that, I just think Titan is a tad bit slower, but so much more powerful and like able to fight through stuff and consistent. Um, and I don't know,
Yeah, I
I'm
think
not.
I think the reason to do something like this would be like if you don't feel comfortable with Titan, valid,
Mm,
you know. Um and B, like maybe you're worried that you're going to play a lot of combo mirrors and you just want
mm,
to put the pedal to the metal. This does both.
mm, yeah. Okay. I'm in. Um, all right, and one of the last things we have here is the return of Boros. We kind of, last time talking about the RC, Boros had ticked up a good bit post Pro Tour, right? And we kind of talked about, and I mentioned how like, oh, at the Pro Tour you can always count on players to kind of play the best decks, and decks that Boros normally beat up on aren't around as much, right? Because players are playing the good decks, and energy is losing to strategies, etc. It seems to have tampered down a little bit, but still kind of settle at like significantly higher than the Pro Tour, but nowhere near the representation we once saw. And we mentioned a little bit about this with Jeskai kind of taking over the metagame in a lot of ways and probably eating some of those Boros players. But I was curious, do you sort of agree with that statement still? Is there anything you'd want to say about Boros? I don't think there's a ton in that regard, but it felt worth checking in on.
So I pulled the win rates from MTG decks just to kind of browse them. First, specifically this question of Boros, like how is it doing? Boros is actually posting a very, very strong win rate in the last 15 days. Actually, like a 55% win rate, which is kind of crazy to me. Looking at the breakdown, though, the decks that it's getting its wins off of primarily are ones that I expect to be on the down. And I kind of expand the range out for just more data. It kind of flattens out to that 50-50. So I think it's a fine, like okay choice, but I do think that the Jeskai Blink deck has a much better spread. And I think a lot of people who might be drawn towards playing a mid-range deck will probably play Jeskai Blink deck, and it is ahead by a smidge in the Boros energy deck, which makes sense to me. If they can get past the initial like turn one threats and such, like getting through like a Guide of Souls Ocelot Pride draw or like shut down the Ajani, they have as many flages as you, and they have more card draw, and they're just able to push through. But I think Boros is back to showing it could be a top dog if people found a way to like push out these Blink decks without harming them. It's just they're not right now. But the metagame factors that were keeping it from being as keeping it down to be a deck that I would maybe put on the shelf, they've shifted. A lot of this episode we've talked about how things have changed. Those changes, I think, have in the net benefited Boros. There's a lot less of the decks that are really there to just hose them.
That makes sense to me. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Abe, before we wrap up here on our modern check-in?
No.
Makes sense to me. All right, you have to play the RC tomorrow. What are you picking?
I personally have to play the RC tomorrow. I would play Infinity because I have not. I'm still not feeling Paper Titan ready.
That's fair. That's fair. I might risk it all on some wild hunches I have about the Birthing Ritual deck, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of playing same style of deck. I'd be willing to take the risk. I'll say this: if I was preparing for Vegas, which I'm not playing, I would put a lot of time into trying to see if I could solve the issue of like big thing resolved against my Simic deck, and I kind of struggle from that point of like getting it off the table unless I have Oculus to overpower it. Anyways, that will do it for the main the main topic of today's show. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/ccmtg. The show will always be free, but it is always appreciated if you want to give back a little to the show. And one of the perks of the Patreon is asking the Patreon question. And Abe, you want to read this week's question?
Yes, this week's question comes from Micah, which is, how big would a vanilla creature of each mana value need to be playable in Modern? What is the mana value at which an infinity vanilla creature would not be playable?
Well, I think okay, you go, sorry.
Okay, so this is actually two questions. I think we should address them one by one.
That makes sense. Should we start with the second one? Because I think we both agree on this one.
Yeah, for the infinity.
Yeah, there's no number because I'll reanimate it. I'll cheat it.
Yeah, it's practically like, I mean, you can stop at like, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 100 or whatever. But yeah, the ability, if it's just a vanilla creature, which means there's no restriction on cheating it into play, like, it doesn't really matter the mana value because I'll just cheat it into play and like fling it or sneak attack it or
show
whatever.
and tell it, or through the breach. Excuse me, that's what I meant to say.
Find a way to. I'll Kragwick Cremator it, right? Like I'll find a way to use the game piece not as a castable game piece. Ain't nobody looking at that casting cost.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a great point on the Kragwick Cremator. We saw that Yargle and Multani saw Fringe Modern play for a bit, right? And that was like a night. What is it? Was it like 19 or 20 power? I forget what it is. It's like really big.
It's like it's 18.
18. Yeah, so like
it's a double Yargle.
Yeah, that's right. It's double Yargle. Anyways, there's all this cheat it. Gotta be careful with your questions. This is how we get you. On to the mana value. I think the ones I'm curious to talk about, Abe, is just 1, 2, and 3, right? Like I can't imagine much higher from that in Modern, being like a worthwhile conversation. So let's start on 1 mana value. Where do you put the line? What's your starting pitch?
Without talking about color,
yeah.
I think that for the card to be playable in Modern, I'm not saying staple in Modern, I'm saying playable in Modern. I think that like 4/4 is for sure playable. I think you could probably like 3/5. There's some set of like 3 power but much larger than 3 toughness, which would suck to print because then you'd have a bunch of people casting 1 mana 3/5s and like slam them into each other.
Yeah,
but like as an even static creature, I think a 4/4 would be there. I think for a 2 mana creature, I'm thinking like 7, probably like 7/7, somewhere there. It has to be.
I was thinking 6/7.
Pretty big. You think 6/7?
Yeah.
For the meme, really?
I honestly, I was thinking 6/6 isn't good because of Unholy Heat, so it needs to be a 7.
I'm thinking 7/7 for the same reason I don't want to have like you run into the Tarmogoyf problem.
Yeah, I get it. It's the meme though. My brain's so cooked. Oh, it's so funny. Maybe it's influencer.
And then a 3 mana.
Art imitates life.
I ain't cast no vanilla creature for 3 mana.
Yeah, it gets back to like it almost needs to be something I'm cheating in the play to win, right? Yeah, I don't know, like give me like a 11 something,
10/10 might be.
Yeah, give me a Hercules card, it's 10/10 or whatever.
But that's because I can Parmesan it, Like I need it to be getting me halfway there. So if I'm doing something cheesy with it, my 3 mana 10/10.
Yeah, 3 mana is probably just too much to actually talk about a realistic card. Yeah, because you just have to be cheating at that point. Like
you just get traded. You get traded down on mana so bad in so many spots with it. Like they just you spend 3 mana on just a creature and you die in the Modern format. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it basically like one of the ways I'm interpreting this question is like, what is a big enough vanilla that you could build your deck to clear the way and protect the queen that it's good enough to win, right? But like not be broken. I do think 4/4 is probably the line at which like players should consider playing a vanilla 1-drop, but I'd probably print 5/5 because that gets there for like that actually gets the conversation going. You know what I mean? It's like so tempting to touch the candy bar because it is a vanilla creature. And 2-drop, I think 7/7. I'm in. Doesn't need to be that much more. I mean, the thing about that is like it kills so quickly. I do agree that like 3/5 probably gets there, or like 5/7 type situation, 6/7 that probably gets there. Of like it dodges enough of the removal, is strong enough, and closes the door up so quickly. It's funny because like 5 to 6 doesn't really change the clock unless they shock, which to be fair, or double fetch is very common in Modern. But like 7 is like a meaningful difference for a whole turn. So it also matters a lot of the color, right? Like in my mind, I'm imagining a green creature because green is the color of like big creatures. But like heaven forbid this thing is blue. You know what I mean? Like this is blue. It's like it's pictured to my flair and my force and my subtlety, and suddenly the Birthing Ritual deck has a good 1-drop. That you can jump into things. So yeah, I think that's where my answer is on that question. Um,
Yeah, I think that the one like my only I would definitely not want to jump from 1 mana 3/3, which is what we have with Wild Nacatl,
yeah,
to 1 mana 5/5, because I just think that you can't undo that, and I think it's probably too much. Like,
what if it was
I don't know,
colorless for
4/4
the
is pretty
Eldrazi?
big.
4/4 is big. Yeah, I mean, it is big, but it's also such a huge ask in current modern, and even like in Legacy too, right? Like, I don't know.
I think that in like many things that we start as saying as Magic players would be a huge ask, change when the power level is that much higher. Like we're now talking about a 1 drop that like 1 mana 4/4 redefined modern when people started finding out that you could play Death Shadow in your deck.
Mhm.
And that's a 1 mana 4/4 with conditions. That I mean, sure it grows, it has upside further, but like just the I can play a 1 mana 4 or 5 power creature and
Mhm.
protect around that redefined modern years ago. I think that if you start allowing that with no drawbacks,
Mhm.
you might see some weird things happen you didn't expect.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I was actually talking to a friend about this the other day, but it is still so surprising to me how little playing Nethergoyf sees when it was a card that like it wasn't on my there's no way this gets to print list when I was working on MH3, which they had us do when we first saw the file, was make a list of cards that are like you think are memes, you think would be good, would be a role player, where you'll be surprised if it makes it through the whole design. It was on my like I think this will be good, and I was like high confidence, and it obviously a lot changed between then and the release and now, but it's just like so surprising that like you know, 1 mana Tarmogoyf, and it's only yourself, to be fair. But like that plus the ability for it to rebuy has like basically been a dud in modern. And obviously I think this would probably actually be better than that. Like a lot of the times. Not every time, but like a lot of the times.
I think a lot of the times.
Yeah, like if this thing was in black, it would almost assuredly be better. That's like the big thing. Is like weirdly, I think the color for this creature matters a ton. Like it probably needs to be like an Eldrazi. This card probably needs to be like C. Like you'd need to spend a colorless on it. Because I mean, like,
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, it has to be
Those are
like
separate
juicy.
questions.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Let's move on to always improving. It is the main point of the show. And Abe, what was your always improving moment this week?
Yeah, my always improvement this week. I actually, following the spotlight, I'm now at a place of like my magic for the year is through. Like I've played all the RSQs I'm gonna play through the rest of the season. There might be some I attend, kind of following the standard bans are gonna happen, but like for my major events, I'm not qualified for any RCs. I'm not traveling to anything. Um, so I'm kind of shifting gears to think about like, retrospective, how was my year? And then also, moving forward, what are my goals for next year and where are the things that I maybe thought I was going to prioritize this year that maybe I did or didn't, and where I was. And I just took the time to actually prioritize that exercise and that reflection. And also like, I think we talked about it in the Fearless Magic inventory episode a lot, but kind of looping someone else into that conversation, reaching out to a friend of mine who I always found to be really helpful for conversations like this, and kind of sharing where I'm at and hearing hearing his thoughts on it, and just kind of like starting that process of how can I and what am I going to do in the coming weeks here and months as we kind of get through the winter cycle to ramp up and keep on having the results that I want next year too.
I really like that always improving. And I think like always thinking about the future, not being caught up in like the moment where like feeling like, oh, I have to get this done right away. I think that's a place where, we all get tripped up from time to time. So I'm good. I think it's good and I'm glad that you are kind of, thinking about things and like the bigger picture, and just sort of being like, okay, you know, yada yada from here. My always improving moment really comes from taking some time to like sit down and just try to understand what's different about these new games. So Riftbound came out, and I haven't played a ton of it, but trying to just, figure out like, okay, what's unique about this game, right? Like, how is this different, and how is that compared to Magic, and vice versa, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, like Time Walk's really powerful in Magic at certain points in the game. How is it at this game? And thinking about those things and kind of comparing them, I find always really helps me get a better idea of like what's strong in Magic and the why. And I think the why is always so important. And it made me kind of realize like, oh, this effect looks like it'd be great in Magic. Well, it would be great in Riftbound because it's so good in Magic, but that's not true, and vice versa. And kind of, sitting down and doing that, I think was a really good moment of like getting back to the like, why are these things good, and not just defaulting to, oh, historically this is good, it has to be good. I think this always and every moment aid could also be spun a different way when talking about the rampant growth that's in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I had a lot of conversation about that card this week and kind of identifying like, yes, like rampant growth Farseek effects in the past have been very, very good, but like what's going on now? Is it for sure going to be good? Who really knows? But like, what are the likely indicators? And kind of talking about why those cards were good, I think was like a nice, refreshing thing.
Yeah, I mean, something that we do often as Magic players, and really, I mean, the whole fun of Magic for a lot of people is understanding and evaluating the cards in context, right? Like looking at cards and like preview season is great. You kind of see what the cards do, you read the text, but then seeing what they actually do when they perform is another thing. What you're talking about in terms of Riftbound is rather than reshaping the context of other cards they're in, it's changing different things about the game and objectives, and so just evaluating different things in new contexts, I think is the part of the secret sauce of what makes trading card games so fun, and especially makes Magic so fun, and it's why things like set roulette is really enjoyable for some people. Cube draft. Yeah, even just drafting alone, right? It's a new context for something familiar. And anytime you do that and you really appreciate, kind of the thought process behind that and engage in that, I think is a good opportunity to, flex those muscles and, look at it from a different light, to then look at the same things in the context you're used to in a different light as well.
Definitely. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. You can check out our sponsor, Mana Traders, and use code CCMTG8 to get a discount on your first 2 months, and you can get Untapped.gg. It's a great deck tracker and another sponsor of the show. Link for that as well in the description. It is free to use and download. There's a premium version, but you get a lot of the free. Check it out and see if it's right for you. It's especially helpful during those arena cube drafts, arena powered cube drafts. So check that out, and we will have more from them in the future, more exciting stuff in that regard. If you want to find me, you can on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. And if you want to reach out for coaching, you can at masoneclark@gmail.com or via those social media routes in the DMs. Just put coaching in the description of your email. That way I know you're not spam. And Abe, what about you?
People can find me over at Blue Sky at More Nothings. You can also find me on Twitter at More Nothings, although these days my posting is almost entirely on Blue Sky. If you're looking for coaching, you can reach out to me either in my DMs on Blue Sky or on Twitter, or send me an email at morenothings@gmail.com. And like Mason does as well, just put coaching in the description so I can make sure to keep track of you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of CCMTG. We'll see you next week.